Good afternoon, everyone. I feel privileged to be the first one to speak at this launch of the Library Research Week 2022 today. My name is Siviwe Bangani, and I'm the Director of Research Services in the library. Today we have put up a short program. The first item on the agenda will be Ms. Tice, the Senior Director, Library Information Services, officially welcoming you all. Thereafter, the DVC, Research, Innovation and Postgraduate Studies, that's Prof. Klute, will officially open the Library Research Week 2022. This will be followed by a panel discussion and, of course, a vote of thanks. Thereafter, some of the in-person guests will join us for a reception in the library staff room. Ladies and gentlemen, first up will be Ms. Tice, followed by Prof. Klute.
Thank you, Siviwe. Good afternoon, colleagues. It is a great pleasure for me to welcome you to the 10th Stellenbosch University Library Research Week. I'd like to warmly welcome our DVC, Professor Klute, who is the DVC for Research, Innovation and Postgraduate Studies. He's here with us in the auditorium, but he just informed me he will actually have to leave soon. They're handling a situation, and I know Professor Daresh Ramjugana, he has also accepted online, but he may not be able to join us, but should he be able to do so, also a warm welcome to him. I'd also like to welcome our panelists this afternoon, as well as the facilitator, Professor Ronnell Carlson from the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. So Library Research Week is one of the flagship projects of the library, where we target researchers, academics, and postgraduate students. Our vision is to see this as a prime forum which partners with other academic support units to first of all, to share their knowledge in order to impart and further develop the skills of researchers and postgraduate students at Stellenbosch University. It is only but one of the ways by which the library seeks to contribute to the university's theme of research for impact. So we started, first of all, just before I continue, I sort of forgot. Of course, we also want to welcome, we're also joined by about 110 delegates or attendees this afternoon virtually. And you've been the ones that were lucky to be invited to attend in person. So this year, for the first time, we're doing this the launch is a hybrid, but the rest of the Research Week will still be virtual. So as we know, first of all, we started with Research Week in 2013 under the theme, Be Research Smart at Your Library. In 2014, the theme was Be Research Smart at Your Library, which seems to be the same. And in 2015, it was Secure Your Research Footprint. In 2016, it was Fine-Tuning Your Research. And in 2017, it was The Nuts and Bolts of Research. In 2018, it was Research in Action. The theme for 2019 was Be a Smart Researcher. For 2020, it was supposed to be the Olympics, so we went for Go for Research Gold with your library. And in 2021, it was Research en masse. And what's the connection there? Being agile in a time of change in keeping with the challenges of our time. Previously, as I have alluded to earlier, it was held in person, but since 2020, again, due to the pandemic, we have actually held it completely virtual, which will be the same this year, except for this event this afternoon, which is in a hybrid format. So we will most probably continue it because in line with the theme Research Impact, I looked at the impact of Library Research Week in the past 3 years using attendance numbers, views of our Library Research Week videos, and attendees' feedback as proxy for impact. I was pleased to realize that 802 researchers were in the past, when it was in person, probably around 50, 100, 120, 300 attended for the whole week. But in 2020, as I said, 802 researchers and students attended Library Research Week. This number increased to 992 in 2021. And so far this year, 996 persons have registered. So I hope we will still go over the 1,000 mark this year. So all the presentations of each of our 2020 and 21 are accessible from the university's YouTube channel online. The 2020 presentations had collectively accumulated 2,323 views by today, while the 2021 accumulated 1,950 to date. In 2020, we received the following comments from one of the researchers. Thank you to the Library Services team and consultants. These sessions are an excellent initiative to not only equip researchers and staff with information, skills and networking spaces, but help us through a challenging time by feeling connected and supported. Well done. This year's theme is mapping your research journey. The metaphor for research as a journey resonates with many researchers. In their article, The Journey, Nolan and two others explain that, I quote, reflecting on the journey is an important part of the research process, not only in helping you to understand what your research may have achieved, but also in gaining a sense of oneself as a researcher. There is no doubt that being involved in research does impact on you at an individual level, both personally and professionally. Whether you have completed research by yourself or in a team environment, you may have had opportunities to build your research expertise, confidence, and sense of accomplishment. If you have been exposed to new methodologies and methods in undertaking the research project, this will increase your understanding of working with different ideas in different ways. Therefore, research is a journey as well as a process. Including the panel discussion that we will have this afternoon, and the facilitator will explain about the topic for this afternoon and place it within the context of our research week and what we're trying to achieve here. There will be in total 15 sessions during this week, speaking to various research themes such as writing of a research proposal, research ethics, mixed methods research, literature researches and reviews, copyright, statistics and research, using Atlas TI for data analysis, using Mendeley to manage your references, open access publishing, data visualization, and research data management. All these are meant to empower, accompany, and provide tools to the researcher as he or she embarks on this research journey. With those few words, I welcome you to the 2020 Library Research Week, which will be opened by Professor Klute right now. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ellen. Good afternoon, colleagues. Also for those online, it is a pleasure to be here this afternoon to open the Library's Research Week, which has now been going for a large number of years with major impact, as you have heard. So at the outset, Ellen, I want to thank you and your staff and all the presenters, the facilitators for taking time out to speak to our researchers and our students during this week. I think the title is very apt for a research journey. I had the privilege last week in Thursday to listen to the inaugural lecture of Professor Annie Becker. Now, she's in engineering, and what she does, I think, afterwards, I also mentioned this, she's a bit of an extreme scientist, because what she does on a regular basis with some of her students, she goes on the Agulhas to Antarctica because the research is researching how this ship responds to the adversity or to the ocean itself. And then they stay, of course, in Antarctica for a while. She does more research there, and then they come back. But if you think about your research, it is like a journey. So you don't just get onto this boat and you set in a particular direction without knowing exactly what your destination is. So, and the amount of effort that goes into that, into determining, well, why do I actually want to go to Antarctica? What is the destination, metaphorically speaking, of my research is extremely important. And often when I speak to our PhDs and postdocs, and on Thursday I will be talking to a large number of young academic staff, I normally ask them the question, why are they doing this? What is their objective? What is their destination? And you must think very carefully of that destination. But then comes the planning. Then you have to look at the logistics. You've got to look at the map. You've got to look at the resources. You've got to look at the rules and regulations. And you'll be talking this afternoon in a workshop, which I'm really sad that I will miss, about ethics. Your friend or foe. I'm dealing with another ethical issue outside of our building at the moment. They're in Admin B. Those of you that came via Admin B will know that there are about 1,000 students out there at the moment, and you read about why in the newspaper tomorrow, and it's not a good reason. But nevertheless, so we have set up our rectorate as a contingency committee meeting, so I'll be leaving after I've welcomed all of you here. But nevertheless, and then, of course, the other thing that struck me in this presentation of Professor Becker is that it's not an easy journey. You, in fact, think that things are going to work out exactly according to the route that you planned, according to your methodology. And suddenly, what you find is that the pack ice overnight just appeared. And now you're stuck. You're just stuck. You can't go. You're not going to reach your destination. You are using additional resources. She spoke about the importance of the propeller of such a ship. I never realized that without the propeller, the ships just go down, or they just lose direction and they fall over. They need the momentum. And part of the research is, in fact, to study the forces that work on these propellers. But the point I want to make is, this is not an easy journey. If you embark on a PhD study, believe me, you need a huge amount of tenacity. Because you will hit those big waves that will slam the boat, or you might even run into pack ice. But then the important thing is, what do I do next? How do I navigate my way to get to this end destination? And then, of course, when you reach the destination and when you publish your research, there is this reward for being original and for being the first one to actually come up with new information, and that in itself is very gratifying. In fact, I think most researchers actually get hooked on that feeling, which is good, by the way, because they keep on doing it over and over and over. That in itself is a challenge. But more than just the publications, it is also about what is the impact that your research will make. The impact on society. It's not only about these research papers, which we all like, because we build our careers that way and we get our promotions based on that to a large extent. But the real question is, when I've done all of this, so what? What difference am I making to the quality of life of the people that are in society? And that is, it's part of our vision of this university, not only to be research intensive, of course, because you can be research intensive and you can be the leading university in terms of churning out numbers of papers. The question remains, so what? And that's an important, and that's why the last part of our vision statement is so important, because it speaks to making a difference in society. And this is a big, great institution, Stellenbosch University, with a fantastic reputation in terms of research, innovation, success in terms of postgraduate studies, but also more so in terms of the impact that the university is making. Now, I want to end off by stating that a university cannot be a university without a library. And the library over the past 3 years, during very difficult circumstances, have exceeded all expectations, seamlessly, in fact, and I see many of the staff here this afternoon, of the library staff, and I want to thank you in person while we have the opportunity to speak to each other face to face, for the immense effort that you had put in to make the library what it was and still is, but especially the kind of support that you gave to our lecturers, to the university, to go online virtually seamlessly. If it had not been for your dedication and for your hard work, we would have been in a very difficult situation, a far more difficult situation than what we had to live with over the past 2 years. And Ellen, for your leadership, you just sort of thought that, well, this is like normal, you know, to continue with the library and information service as if nothing's wrong. But of course it's not normal. It's abnormal. And all of you have made it possible for this university to actually move forward. And the impact that the Library and Information Service has made, particularly over the past 2 years, has just been immense. And I'm, you know, very, very grateful for the work that all of you have put in to make this possible. Enjoy this week. You see that we have more than 1,000 delegates that will attend different parts of this coming week. Again, the impact is big. I often see the reviews that come back from the attendees of these workshops, and the reviews are overwhelmingly positive. So again, thank you and good luck with your deliberations, and all of the best for the rest of this week. Thank you very much, Ellen.
Thank you. Now you can see why Professor Klutter had said, when he asked if he needs to send a briefing to Professor Klutter for this afternoon speech, the message was, no, I don't need a briefing, I know what I want to say.
Yes, thank you so much, Prof. Klutter. But thank you for your leadership as well. I don't speak on behalf of the library. I can't speak on behalf of the library when my boss is here. But really, we would like to really thank you for your leadership, and also for providing these opportunities for the library. And thanks for your kind words. And thanks, Ms. Tice, for welcoming everybody. Now the next item will be the panel discussion, colleagues. According to Professor Ngulube, research is ethically intensive. Hence, research ethics should guide the production of all scholarly inquiry globally. The Committee on Publications Ethics articulates this as follows: good research should be well adjusted, well planned, appropriately designed, ethically approved. To conduct research to a lower standard may constitute misconduct. With the ethical, as well as there is also the POPI Act in the case of South Africa that researchers should uphold. The Act requires all researchers to ensure proper safeguards for personal information and ensure that the information collected is used solely for research purposes. So with the ethical and legal requirements, it is inevitable that there is often tension between those who have been given custodianship and gatekeeper role for research ethics and POPI. This is why it is important to have today's panel discussion to try and address some of the issues associated with research ethics as well as POPI. I will now hand over to Professor Ronnell Carlson, who will facilitate the next session. Professor Carlson is based in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. The panelists include Dr. Marilise Becker, who is joining us online. Dr. Becker is based at the Medicine and Health Sciences Faculty. She also chairs the Stellenbosch University's Health Rec 1. The second panelist is Ms. Katlego Mtelebofu. Ms. Mtelebofu is a law lecturer and she's also a member of SU's Research Ethics Committee, Social, Behavioral, and Education Research. The third panelist is Mr. Gerald Toy. Mr. Toy is from the University's Information Governance Office, where he is Stellenbosch University's 2 deputy information officers under South Africa's Promotion of Access to Information Act and Protection of Personal Information Act. He currently chairs the Universities South Africa's, that's USAF, POPI Forum. We also have Ms. Clarissa Robertson from SU's. I have to be careful so that I don't give your maiden name. Ms. Clarissa, you did warn me about that. From SU's Division for Research Development. She's also the coordinator, Research Ethics Committee, Social, Behavioral, and Education Research. Prof. Carlson, over to you. If I may, please can all panelists sit in front?
Oh, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody, and also to all of you who are online today. I'm Ronnell Carlson, and I'm in the Department of Psychology. I think in all of our experience as either a student or as a research supervisor, the one big thing that we all panic about is ethics. And today's session is really to talk about this thing that bothers us, gives us sleepless nights, anxiety, but to, I think, familiarize ourselves with some of the information that reduces all of our anxiety around it, and also some of the familiar faces, or perhaps some of the unfamiliar faces that help us to make the research ethics process such a happy one. So I think I'm not going to speak too long, but I think I want to pick up on what Dr. Tees said about mapping a journey. Because often in my experience as a supervisor, students, masters and doctoral students, often want to talk about the product, the tick sheet, the forms that must be filled in. And of course, that is a very small component of the ethics process. For me, ethics and learning about ethics in research is about the process and learning how to engage with other researchers, but more importantly perhaps, with people who participate in our research projects. Ethics is essentially a relational process. And so for us, it's very important that to understand how that process works. And I think the metaphor of mapping is important. We know that maps change. Even physical maps change. Just look at how geography changes when we think of floods, so physical geography changes. But in the same way, the landscape of ethics changes because policies change. And so we thought in today's session, we will also get Mr. Gerald Toy to speak a little bit about research ethics and POPI. And so without much ado, I'm going to ask the panelists to perhaps respond to some of the questions that we prepared and that I think a lot of people often wonder about when, I think I should say not a lot of people, a lot of us wonder about when we start to think about research ethics and the process. So I'm immediately going to kick off to ask the Ethics Committee members on the panel Ms. Katlerigo Ntlebofu, Dr. Marlies Berger, and then also Mrs. Clarissa Robertson, to address the following question. What is the process of applying for ethical clearance in your committee? And what are your expectations from the researchers? Perhaps you can decide who will go. Clarissa? Thanks, Clarissa.
Thank you. Yes, so in terms of and I see Dr. Marlies Berger's online, so I'm only going to speak for the Research Ethics and the Social Sciences Committee. But, and then I'll ask Ms. Ntlebofu to speak on her experiences as a Research Ethics Committee member and the expectations. But procedurally, at Stellenbosch University, we have an online research ethics application and review process. So what would typically happen is a researcher or student would, of course, develop their proposal with the supervisory team and the department, and once that proposal is prepared, you would then venture onto this online application portal, which we call Apply Ethics. And from there, you will complete the online application form of the relevant committee to which you wish to apply to. And thereafter, it's a very automated process. Thereafter, your application will be reverted to your supervisor. There will be a back and forth, as expected, between yourself and your supervisor, trying to just clarify and to address some issues there. But once your supervisor is satisfied with the ethics application, it will then be sent to the relevant research ethics committee. I think I will stop there and perhaps if anyone else wants to.
Dr. Berger, you can perhaps talk a little bit about the Health Sciences Ethics Committee. What is the process?
Good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you very much for the invitation and being part of this very important research week. So from my side and from the Faculty of Health Sciences and Medicine side, it's very similar to what Clarissa explained. It's an online process. You develop the protocol with your supervisors, and after that, you submit via the online platform. This then goes into review, and then the process follows from there. In terms of the expectations that we have of researchers, so as several of the introductory speakers mentioned, this is a process, and we have a map that you basically follow. And what we expect of researchers is that your map, which is a protocol, then basically explains why are you asking this research question. So you need to provide the background, you need to provide a rationale of why you're doing this research, and then you need to provide the methods of the research that you're going to do. And this is basically the how, the what, the where, the when, the how often, the by whom, all of those questions need to be answered. So that is what we expect. We expect that the methodology aligns to your research aims and objectives, so that it all basically just tells a line. The researchers to have considered risks and benefits. We like researchers to have considered the feasibility in terms of the timelines, the budgets, the ethical considerations, and then finally also how they plan to disseminate the research to the population, to the general reader, to the general public, and to the communities that participated in their research.
Thank you, Dr. Berger. I wonder if we can go on. How to think about how do you deal the various committees with overlaps, say for example from health sciences and social sciences, medical sciences. How do you deal with that?
Thank you, Mr.
Kathleen?
So how we normally deal with overlaps between the different committees is the first rule of thumb is to make sure that you stick within your... I'm sorry. So sorry about this. I'm so sorry about that. So the first rule of thumb when we're dealing with overlaps in terms of your different committees is that we can request expert inputs if we are uncomfortable as a research committee in approving a study that we're not familiar with in terms of our disciplines. But in that regard as well, what we do is that we should stick to the discipline that you're most familiar with. So for instance, if a protocol is not within my specific discipline, but I can provide inputs from a legal perspective, that is what I do. And just as a safeguard is that we can request expert inputs, and we have a second committee member who also provides inputs as well.
So it sounds as if there's a range of experts from various fields within each ethics committee. So in health sciences, there will be people from orthopedics, or there will be people from vascular departments, the vascular exploration. There will be people from neurosurgery, and the same in social science. There will be people from psychology, from political science, etc. And those, basically it's funneled. The research ethics application is funneled to people who have the most expertise to review it, if I'm getting it correctly.
Yes, you
Okay.
are.
Thanks.
And we also have, we also collaborate between research ethics committees.
Right.
So in the scenario where you might be doing research, animal research, but also have a component where there are participants, individuals or groups that are involved, typically the ethics committees and the coordinators, we speak to one another. We try our best not to work in silos. So you would have someone reviewing your proposal from the Animal Ethics Committee side and from either the Health Research Ethics Committee side and from the Social Sciences, Behavioral Sciences. And similarly between the REC SBE and the Health Research Ethics Committee, where there is an application that kind of treads on the line between health and non-health, we would typically ask for an expert review from our colleagues at the Health Research Ethics Committee.
Right.
Yeah.
So referral, cross-fertilization, consultation makes for experts to review specific proposals. That sounds excellent. And so it's a system that runs across the university, and that where you draw on the expertise of various colleagues to be able to do a good peer review. I'm going to jump from the actual ethics committee members to go to Mr. Toy. Mr. Toy, yes. I think of you as Mr. Poppier in the university. I think of you as Mr. Poppier. Here's an example of where amendments to policy have impacted significantly on how the research ethic, on how research is done and functions and needs to be thought about. Can you perhaps explain in a nutshell how the POPI Act impacts research, and perhaps highlight some of the key points that we have to think about as researchers?
Thanks, Prof. At its core, POPI is a collection of principles that we need to apply, and we also need to be able to explain how we apply those principles when we are considering working with personal information, when we are actually working with personal information, and after we have worked with personal information. So you can see it links nicely to the thread of a journey and a map. There's stuff you need to think about beforehand, during, and afterwards. But one really nice thing about POPI is that I get to say that it's not scary and it doesn't have to be difficult. If you look at the Act itself, you'll find one of the principles discusses information security. But we don't practice information security because POPI says we need to practice information security. We use good security practices so that we have the peace of mind that we know our research will survive my spilling coffee on my own laptop. I like to drink coffee and I work on a laptop, and sometimes those are happening at the same time. And good security practices would allow me to recover from a coffee spill. And in doing those good practices, we also happen to comply with POPI at the same time, or an element of POPI. And what we've discovered, at least anecdotally among my colleagues, my peers at other universities, is that when we are presented, or when we present a privacy-related question to our colleagues in research ethics committees, especially those who have no formal training or experience with privacy, they come up with a good privacy-compliant solution relying on their knowledge of good research ethics and practices. So by applying good research ethics, or the practices recommended through good research ethics, you will comply with the bulk of POPI right there and then. That said, the POPI is predominantly a collection of principles. There are still a few hard rules in there. And the Academy of Science of South Africa are busy working towards developing a code of conduct for all research done in South Africa. And this code of conduct, if it is approved by the regulator, the information regulator, it will clarify those aspects for our researchers. In the interim, while we wait for that code of conduct, and of course we can contribute as well, there will be calls for commentary, etc. We can contribute towards that discussion. But while we wait for that, what we're trying to do, or what we have done from our division, is to add a few extra questions, sorry Clarissa, on your form at times, that helps our researchers identify when one of these hard rules might trigger for them, and point them to resources, including our team, to help them navigate those hard requirements of POPI. But for most research, at its core, POPI compliance, if you're doing good information security, good research data management, you've got good consent handling procedures, then you're likely POPI compliant.
Thanks very much. Now let's go back to you on the panel as ethics committee members. To what extent do you consider POPI in deciding on ethics applications, yay or nay? You need to do a bit more work. I wonder if you can go, Dr. Berger.
Sure, I think the main question, or the main answer to that, is basically that we have a hotline to Gerald's office. No, so to give you a broad overview, so we have all the committee members have undergone training with the Information Governance Office. So we have a basic understanding of what is required, and we basically know how to flag something that might potentially be a problem. But that is basically as far as it goes. Jokes aside, there has been extensive discussion, and so the general response is that the mandate of protection of personal information is not a strict mandate. But we know how to check for the basics, and we know when to refer. If there are any potential issues or anything that we are really concerned about, we refer them to the Information Governance Office, who's been absolutely amazing and helping us navigate this new complex pathways. So yeah, I think that's something that we do. If there's any concern, then we definitely contact Gerald or the office, and we also often refer researchers to them where we also are not sure.
Would you like to comment?
I think just to add on to what Professor Berger has indicated is that we, thank you to the Information Governance, in the form that researchers have to complete, there's a privacy impact assessment that they need to upload as well. And one of the things that we do find is that researchers indicate that they have done it, but they do not upload the outcomes. And that is very important for us in considering the application in its entirety.
Mm-hmm. I want to add to that actually, the reason that privacy impact assessment is so important is it helps you with assessing your privacy risks. Yeah. But it also guides us in terms of when someone explains that they're going to use this specific research data management practice, or they're going to use this specific survey platform or tool, it guides us in terms of the privacy risk outcome of that self-impact assessment, whether those tools that they want to use are appropriate, and it's gone through the relevant checks at our IT services to ensure that the proper information security practice.
So it sounds to me, again, it's important to consult, have a conversation, because that is really where some of the things that we're unsure about as researchers will be clarified, and in fact help us to prepare appropriately, to prepare our ethics applications appropriately. I'm going to ask you a bit of a difficult question now. I wonder if you can perhaps speak to, and these are the members of the ethics committees, if you can perhaps very briefly speak to some of the challenges, difficult decisions that you've had in, or at least one or two difficult decisions that you've had in dealing with an ethics application. You know, I served for a couple of years on the ethics committee, and sometimes there are really thorny issues that one has to deal with that reminds one of the importance of ethics committees. So perhaps I'm going to ask you to speak to one of those.
I first want to make it clear that I think all the applications that come through to us are quite difficult because they're complex in terms of their disciplines and methodology, etc. So based on that, I think the safeguards that our standard operating procedures provide us with, where we are uncomfortable, whereas a reviewer rather, you're uncomfortable with a certain application. If you want to see it again, you can indicate modifications. But because it's not only you reviewing and there's a second reviewer, then we have sort of a consultation as to whether or not it's modifications, if there's serious issues that we need to see again and that the researcher needs to just attend to, or whether we bump it up to approved stipulations or approved. And then with regards to deferred or rejected, ideally in terms of the standard operating procedures, the guideline is that we should create the opportunity for the researcher to correct certain items. So those are the safeguards that are there as ethics members.
Thanks very much, Dr. Berger, would you like to speak a little bit to some of the difficult applications, difficult in inverted commas? How are you doing with it?
So basically that is more or less every cycle of ethics applications. There's at least one of them. So for me, I always say I've got a love-hate relationship with ethics because I love how it challenges you and I hate how it challenges you. But for me, it is one of the really good things is that it just highlights the innovative and novel research that is being done at our institution. Because we are really pushing the boundaries, with technology advances and with things like machine learning being developed and becoming more popular, you run into research studies where there is no precedent. There's nothing to go on, what has been done before. You have to basically discuss and make a decision. So it's really fun. It's really challenging. It's really frustrating sometimes. But so it happens quite often, and I can't mention any specific protocols that that has been specifically difficult to discuss, but I can maybe mention an example of an ethics seminar that I was in recently, where one of the speakers made had the example of technology advances in self-driving cars. If the self-driving car causes an accident, who's to blame? If a self-driving car has to decide whether to run into oncoming traffic or hit a pedestrian, how does it make the decision? Now, things with machine learning, with advances in technology, you get to these very difficult questions. What I can say, though, is that in my 5 years of the ethics committee so far, I can count on one hand the number of studies that has been rejected. It is normally, if we run into really difficult situations, we have extensive consultation with experts in different fields. We have extensive consultation with the applicants, the researchers, and it's a back and forth and discussion and motivation and providing rationales, and it's never just an outright rejection because, we don't agree with that. So it's complex, it's fascinating, it's very challenging, but I think it's a constantly evolving process. And we're learning along the way, and we have things like POPI Act that governs us, and the Constitution, and international standards, and GCP, and all those things that guide us in making decisions. But it's always interesting discussions that happen on those Wednesday meetings.
Thanks so much, Dr. Berger. I think what I'm hearing very clearly is that ethics committees at this university is not a department that puts a stamp rejected or approved. What I'm hearing is that there's always a conversation which results in very few ethics applications being outrightly rejected. That's great, because I think what I emphasized in the beginning is the learning around the process. And I think that learning happens throughout the ethics committees engaging with the researcher or the student and the supervisor. You want to say something quickly?
Yes, thank you, Professor. So just to tack on to what you've just said about it being not just a rubber stamping or kind of a approve or rejection. I think as part of what I often, when I interact with students and researchers are rightfully so, it is a very anxious process to receive feedback from an ethics committee, and then you get like several pages of comments from an ethics committee saying that so many questions, so many comments, so many corrections. And often how I try to at least diffuse that kind of interaction with our researchers is that remember that what the Research Ethics Committee, the way the process is structured is that the Research Ethics Committee sees your documentation and they don't see you as a person. So it's difficult to have that. We would, even though it's not always possible to have that one-on-one conversation with someone. Sometimes it would have been easier, I think Dr. Berger and Mr. Telebofu would agree with me. Sometimes it would have been easier to just ask someone the question, and that we have to do via document form. So if you get a modifications required, it's not to say that your research is awful or that the proposal is awful. It's really to clarify and to get more information from you about the context so that our reviewers can help you make your research or put steps in place that would make it more ethical and appropriate.
Yeah, sometimes, I think that's a very important point, because sometimes I also realize, and I teach my students, that if someone asks for more information, it simply means we didn't write it clearly enough. And I think perhaps that is something to hold on to. It's not about you. It's never going to get your master's or your PhD or get that research project through. It's important to make others understand very clearly what your vision for your project is. Having said that, I'm now going to open up for questions from the audience, and we will not forget the online audience, so thank you very much. So if there are any questions, I'd really like you to ask the panel.
Marie, you get anything online? Nothing yet. I'm asking you.
Any questions?
Yeah. Starting right at the start, and I think when
just hold on for the microphone, the roving.
I was wondering if there was another mic that we could use. Thank you. So just based on my own experience, and I have to say you make it sound very, very easy in terms of the process and the application form, but I have to say, and maybe it has changed, but about 3 or 4 years ago, when I had to apply for ethical clearance, even just the first question to know which committee you should actually submit your application to, because it's not just in terms of the discipline, but there are some questions that I think is very difficult to decide, you know, whether you're going to do this or does this apply and so on. So has the process been improved? Or do you find that you sometimes receive applications that should not have been submitted to the committee that who received it?
Thank you for that question. Yeah, the process, regrettably, our university is quite large. So I'm thinking about the specific question or the question in our forms that you are talking about, in terms of it's the filter questions where we ask you whether your research fits into the health research ethics committee or whether it's social sciences related. And the reason we try to do that is to assist our researchers in filtering them to the right committee, where the right expertise is to review their application. So at the process has improved a bit, where we're now working more collaboratively with our colleagues at the Health Research Ethics Committee, where if usually we advise our researchers, email us. It's the fastest way. Email your proposal to us, and then I check in with my colleagues at the Health Research Ethics Committee to confirm, yes, you should submit an application to the Health Research Ethics Committee, or you should submit an application to the Social Sciences Ethics Committee. Particularly our two committees, because both deal with research in with human participants, but with a different angle. And in terms of the departments, yes, I forgot to mention that previously, the Research Ethics, Social Behavioral and Education Committee, we have Department Ethics Review Committee procedures that precede the formal Research Ethics Committee sitting. So that's where it becomes very important for our students or our researchers to map themselves, to position themselves in, I need to submit my application. I am perhaps a researcher within sociology and social anthropology, and I need to tick that department's box in order for this wonderful online portal of ours to automatically redirect the application to that department, so that it follows that route towards the Research Ethics Committee, the Central Ethics Committee. So we always try to improve our processes as we get feedback from our researchers and our students that something's a bit off or something's not working. It takes time, but we want to get there.
Yeah, and it sounds like sometimes there's a bit more complexity as well and nuances within departments. Because, for example, if I look at my department, psychology, some of my colleagues who work in public health, for example, often send their applications to the Health Research Ethics Committee. So I think that it's also about department, but it's also about nuances. I wonder if you'd like to comment, Dr. Berger?
Absolutely, and that is exactly why we have such a good working relationship with the official line, but basically the red on main campus. Because very often we have these overlap, or there's, like you say, different nuances that's slightly different. So usually if there are patients involved, then we say it comes to health research ethics, but it's not always that clear cut. If I've learned anything from ethics, it's always a grey area. So it happens that, it maybe spans committees, then we co-opt someone in from a different committee into ours, or vice versa. So we often get those situations where it doesn't quite fit the box. So we just make it work in terms of cross-collaboration.
Thanks. Are there any questions? Yes, thanks.
Thank you very much. I just have one question for Gerald Toy, please. Could you just explain to us the connection between privacy impact assessments, institutional permission, and ethics?
All right.
Okay.
So earlier, I think Clarissa, you were the first one to mention privacy impact assessments. So they are a statutory requirement, but our South African government haven't released clear guidelines on how, when, where, who should be doing these. So we've looked at across the globe, and we've borrowed from our colleagues in Europe under European legislation. They've developed a methodology for assessing any proposed processing of personal information, the potential risks therein to the individuals involved, for example. And here at Stellenbosch, what we've developed is a self-assessment which our researchers can use. It's not going to give you the full view of your research from a privacy point. We do, of course, offer that in our division as a facilitated workshop. But the self-assessment that Clarissa referred to is a quick way for a researcher to assess the value of the information they're working with. And if you, from my side, if you leave with one thing today, it should be that you recognize that information has value. The way in which we have constructed the self-assessment, it measures value on a few different axes. On the one, our legislation has defined certain types of information as special personal information, so being of more value. Then we've also taken another look at it. We've looked at it, if I was a cyber criminal, how could I use this information to inflict harm? The more easily I can inflict harm, or the greater the level of harm I can do with this information, the more valuable it is. And then the more valuable your information is, you should take extra steps to safeguard it appropriately based on the value. So completely anonymous information, and it can be very difficult to completely anonymize information, but if you can get that right, privacy legislation doesn't always apply then. You may get to a point where privacy legislation doesn't apply. So in that sense, the information from our context has very little value. But something with a high value, you need to take appropriate steps to protect it. And what we hope to see from our researchers is when they get a response that says this is high value, that they step back and think about that. Can they do something in their methodology to reduce the value? If they can't, what do they need to put in place that is appropriate for that value of information? So a very simple example is in an internal research survey where we share that with students or staff, we may simply ask for a student number. But in our context, that student number is also an email address, it is also a login name. And one of the easiest attacks that we could use that for is a phishing campaign. All right, so a student number on its own has value. So that is what our privacy impact assessment aims to help our colleagues figure out. And if the self-assessment, if you need help beyond the self-assessment, we of course offer a facilitated workshop to do a deep dive into your proposed information processing. And then Prof. Ian mentioned institutional permission. So within our division, we also have the responsibility to process requests, to do research involving individuals based on their relationship with the university, and also information held by the university. This is separate from ethics, but is considered within ethics approval processes. Because, for example, perhaps you want to do research involving the financial sector, then you would need permission from the individual banks to access, for example, their staff for your research purposes. So our division runs that for Stellenbosch University. I'll pause there.
Thanks, Gerald. You covered quite a lot in a short space of time, and it was a big question. Any other questions?
Yes, Prof, there are quite a number online. I will try to read all four, and yeah,
okay.
Hopefully, yeah, the time won't be. It's from Melissa. I'm in the bioinformatics honors program. What would be the role of the ethics to play here? Is an ethics approval necessary for this field, as it usually works with data already available? Shall I read all of them? The other one, it says,
Maybe just hold on to the first question.
Okay.
The question, if I heard correctly, was how do we deal with ethics and information that is already readily available.
Yes.
So, would you like to go? I'm going to ask everybody. Gerald, are you the best person?
I'll answer from a POPI perspective. So I can't speak to the specific discipline here. But if, for example, you wanted to do research on social media, right? The messages that are shared on social media are personal information, and often with more personal information attached to it. So you might have a username, you might have a real name, you might have a profile picture. The content of the message itself is also personal information. And just because it's in the public domain doesn't mean that POPI suddenly does not apply anymore. So POPI is made up of a host of principles, if you remember correctly. And maybe in this case, one of the principles doesn't apply, but all the others still do. So when we think about a good example of a principle that applies here is we need to be transparent and open, and the POPI calls them data subjects, so that's the person to whom the information relates. They need to be given, we need to be transparent and open with them, and they need to be enabled to enact their rights should they wish to. So we can't just go and scrape reams and reams of information just because it's publicly available. We still need to consider POPI in an integrated manner alongside the ethical considerations, or I don't want to say alongside, but they're almost one and the same for me in most instances.
I mean, that's interesting because just a few weeks ago, I belong to an online, it's outside of the research domain, but I belong to an online foodie group. And I had posted a picture and written a little story about it, about the meal I had cooked. And then a few weeks ago, this group also has a publication attached to it. They sent me a request to ask my permission if that post can go into the magazine, because they're doing a themed magazine, and that post fitted into it. So I had to give them permission, even if it is in the public domain, so to speak. The next question, Siwe? I think we're going to take 2 more questions because we've run about 5 minutes over time, but I want to give the online audience also a bit of a chance.
Okay, as an international student who will carry out my research outside South Africa, the plan is to receive my SU ethics approval and then apply in my home country. What, in your opinion, is the best approach?
What, in your opinion, is the
best approach?
Okay, this person will be in another country, but they're getting clearance here. Right.
That's interesting. We often deal with international. So, where would I start? International students. I wonder whether the student is actually registered at internationally, so at another different institution to Stellenbosch, or are they registered as a registered student at Stellenbosch?
It looks like it's our student.
Oh, so it's our student. Yes. So typically the process would be that if you are a registered student of Stellenbosch University, whether you are international or whether you're based elsewhere, you would need to submit an application to the Stellenbosch University Research Ethics Committee, whichever ethics committee that might apply: animal ethics, biosafety, health and research ethics, and the SPE. So that would be your first point, to find out which ethics committee you need to apply to. But of course, there is the global code of conduct in research poor settings, and I think the principles in that global code of conduct are so important because it says that as researchers, we also need to be responsible that yes, we get ethics clearance from our home institutions, but when we are conducting that research in a different country, we need to get the local ethics clearance in that country as well. So the ethics clearance you obtain from your country, whether that be South Africa or elsewhere, it doesn't necessarily give you a kind of an ethics approval to just kind of do helicopter research in a different country and to collect data and then leave. It's important that you also seek or find out whether you need ethics clearance within the local context as well. So that would be the process that I would imagine would be appropriate to follow. Yes.
Dr. Berger, I see you nodding, which means that you were agreeing with everything that Clarissa is saying, Ms. Robertson.
Yes, absolutely. And it changes often on a case-to-case basis because there's often like subtle differences between different applications. But yes, we only have jurisdiction over our area. So we don't, for example, if you're doing research in Zimbabwe or you're doing research in Germany, we don't have jurisdiction. Ethical requirements are often different than ours. So you obviously need our ethics approval, but then you also need the ethics approval of the host country and institutional approval as well.
Thanks. Last question.
Okay, Noctula says, I'm trying to ascertain if data is available for my study. The organizations that I've approached said I need to write a letter. Do I need to request the university to assist with that letter?
That's called Gatekeeper Permission. So essentially, if you're going to be doing a study in a specific organization, you need to get the gatekeeper's permission to enter that study. So it's part of your application that you need to submit to the ethics committee, and as part of the application that you submit, you have to indicate whether or not you've already gotten gatekeeper permission or you're still going to request it.
Right, gatekeepers. A very important part of the research process and giving and permissions and so on. So colleagues, that's where we end today. Thanks very much to our online audience, as well as to our in-person audience. I think I've learned some valuable information, and I hope that this is perhaps the beginning of a discussion that we can continue subsequently. Thank you very much to the panelists. Svi, you're going to finalize, should you?
Thank you, Prof. I also learned a valuable lesson on how to run a panel discussion. Now I'll have to take my cap as the facilitator of this whole program and do a vote of thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, it is truly a great honor for me to have been asked to have the first and the last word in the launch of the Library Research Week 2022. On behalf of SU's Library and Information Service, I would like to express a hearty gratitude to all the speakers who gave their vital time and expertise to share their perspectives, advice, and words of wisdom with us today. In order, if I may misquote Dr. Becker's statement the other day, to assist us in clearing up some of the myths and misconceptions about research ethics and POPI. As the library, we have been fortunate to have Professor Klute as our land manager at university executive level. Prof. Klute, I would like to thank him for all the support he has given us as the library over the years. We will forever be beholden to him for his support and leadership. I would also like to express our appreciation to him for always gracing this event of the launch of the Library Research Week. I would like to thank my boss, Ms. Ellen Tice, for her leadership and support. If it were not for her support, this Library Research Week 2022 would not have materialized. From the bottom of my heart, I want to also extend my generous thanks to my fellow Library Research Week committee members for their dedication and contribution to the success of this event and the organization of the Library Research Week as a whole. I wish to acknowledge Ms. Marie Roux for providing the technical support for today's event. I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to all members of the audience today, both online and in person. We appreciate your support, and we are very conscious of the fact that without you, this launch would not have been successful. We hope you will continue to support us by attending sessions from tomorrow until Friday. Please feel free to continue providing us feedback on how we can improve our service to you. So now at this moment, I would like to invite in-person guests to a reception that will take place at the library. To the virtual audience, sorry you could not be with us, but we'll keep you in our prayers. I wish you all a very good evening, a very good afternoon. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen.